My son had forbidden me from visiting his beach house, but after he passed under suspicious circumstances, the lawyer handed me the keys. I was about to sell it, but decided to visit first. When I found a letter that revealed the truth about my daughter-in-law, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Inez, and I'm 66 years old. For 23 years, I thought I understood what family meant. I thought I knew my son Darren better than anyone else in this world. I was wrong about everything. The last time I saw my son was on a Tuesday in March, 3 months before he died. We were sitting in my small kitchen, the same one where I'd fed him countless bowls of cereal before school, where we'd done homework together after his father left us when Darren was only 8. The afternoon light was streaming through the window, hitting his face just right, and for a moment he looked like that little boy again. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, and something in his voice made my stomach clench. I set down my coffee cup, noticing how his hands were fidgeting with his wedding ring. Darren had always been a nervous fidgeter, just like his father. "What's wrong, honey?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Fallon and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if you didn't come to the beach house anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. The beach house. The one I'd helped him buy 5 years ago with my life savings of $37,000. The one where I'd spent every holiday, every birthday, watching my grandson take his first steps on that sun-warmed deck. "I don't understand," I whispered. "You're always criticizing Fallon," he said, still not looking at me, "making her feel unwelcome in her own home. She's been crying about it for weeks." My heart started racing. Darren. When have I ever criticized Fallon? I love her like my own daughter. Last Christmas, you questioned how she was feeding the baby. 2 weeks ago, you made comments about how she keeps house. Mom, she's trying her best. I felt dizzy. Last Christmas, I'd simply asked if little Matthew was eating enough solid food because he seemed so thin. And 2 weeks ago, I'd noticed dirty dishes piled up when Fallon said she'd been too tired to clean, so I'd offered to help wash them. Somehow, these moments had been twisted into attacks. "That's not what happened," I said, my voice breaking. "You know me, Darren. You know I would never deliberately hurt anyone." He finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes destroyed me. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion, like he was tired of fighting about me. "I know you think you're helping," he said, "but Fallon feels judged every time you're there. She says you watch everything she does, waiting for her to mess up." The room started spinning. Fallon had been married to my son for 4 years. I'd welcomed her with open arms, included her in every family tradition, listened to her complaints about her own mother, offered advice when she asked for it. I thought we had a good relationship. "Can we talk about this?" I pleaded. "The 3 of us together? Maybe there's been some misunderstanding." Darren shook his head. "She doesn't want to confront you directly. She's too sweet for that. But Mom, she's my wife. I have to protect her. Protect her. From me. His own mother." "What about Matthew?" I asked, thinking of my 3-year-old grandson who always ran to me with sticky hugs and demanded stories about when Daddy was little. "You can see him here at your house, but not at the beach house. That's their home, their sanctuary. Fallon needs to feel safe there. Safe. From me." I sat there staring at my son, this man I'd raised alone, worked double shifts to put through college, supported through his awkward teenage years and heartbreaks. The son who used to tell me I was his best friend, who called me every Sunday without fail, who brought me flowers on Mother's Day and meant it when he said I was the strongest woman he knew. "You're choosing her over me," I said, the words coming out hollow. "I'm choosing my family," he replied. And the way he said it made it clear that I wasn't included in that definition anymore. After he left that day, I sat in my kitchen until the sun went down, staring at the empty coffee cup he'd left behind. I kept replaying every interaction I'd had with Fallon, searching for the moments that had been turned against me. The time I'd suggested a different brand of baby formula when Matthew had been fussy. The time I'd folded laundry while she was napping. The time I'd asked if she wanted me to teach her my pot roast recipe. All innocent moments, all twisted into evidence of my supposedly judgmental nature. I called Darren that night, and he answered but sounded distant. "I just want to understand," I said. "Help me understand what I did wrong so I can fix it." "Mom, you don't get it. This isn't about one thing. It's about making Fallon feel comfortable in her own marriage. She feels like she's competing with you for my attention. But I've never... She says you act like you know what's best for our family better than she does." I wanted to scream that maybe sometimes I did know better, that I'd raised a child successfully while she was still figuring out basic parenting, but I bit my tongue. "I'll apologize to her," I offered. "I'll do whatever it takes." "No, Mom. She doesn't want an apology. She wants space. We both do." That was 3 months ago. 3 months of no Sunday calls, no surprise visits, no random texts about things I'd seen that reminded me of him. 3 months of missing my grandson's bedtime stories and goodnight hugs. 3 months of feeling like I'd somehow become the villain in my own son's story. I kept thinking he'd change his mind, that he'd realize how much he missed me, how quiet his life had become without his mother's voice checking in. I thought Fallon would soften once she realized I wasn't a threat, that I only wanted the best for their family. I never imagined that the next time I'd see my son would be at his funeral. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning. I was watering my plants, thinking about whether I should try calling Darren again, when an unknown number appeared on my phone. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Detective Martinez with the county police. I'm sorry to inform you that your son, Darren Crawford, was found dead in his home this morning." The watering can slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor. Water spread across the linoleum, but I couldn't move to clean it up. "What happened?" I managed to whisper. "It appears he fell down the stairs sometime during the night. His wife found him this morning when she came back from her sister's house." The funeral was held on a gray Saturday morning at Riverside Memorial Chapel. I arrived early, hoping to have a few minutes alone with my son before the service began. But when I walked into the viewing room, Fallon was already there, dressed in black designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She looked up when I entered, her eyes dry despite the crumpled tissues in her hands. For a moment, I thought she might embrace me, that our shared grief might bridge the gap that had formed between us. Instead, she stepped in front of the casket, blocking my view. "I don't think you should be here," she said quietly. I felt like I'd been slapped. He was my son. He was my husband, and you caused him nothing but stress these past few months. Her voice was steady, controlled. "Even now you're making this about you." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but what was the point? My son was dead, and apparently, even in death, I wasn't welcome in his life. I took a seat in the back row, watching as people filtered in. Darren's colleagues, neighbors from the beach house, Fallon's family members who had always treated me politely but distantly. Everyone seemed to know their place except me. The service was beautiful but felt empty. The pastor, who had never met Darren, spoke about him like he was reading from a script. Fallon gave a tearful speech about their perfect marriage and how Darren had been looking forward to their future together. Several friends shared memories that painted him as a devoted husband who lived for his wife's happiness. No one mentioned that he'd been a mama's boy who called me every week until 3 months ago. No one talked about how he used to bring Matthew to visit me every Sunday, how he'd light up when he talked about his childhood memories. It was like the first 35 years of his life. The years before Fallon had been erased. After the burial, people gathered at the community center for a reception. I stood by the coffee table, unsure whether I should stay or leave. A few people offered their condolences, but most avoided eye contact. I was clearly the outsider here, the difficult mother who had complicated Darren's life. I was getting ready to slip away when a man in a dark suit approached me. "Mrs. Crawford, I'm Robert Chen, Darren's attorney. Could I speak with you privately?" I followed him to a quiet corner, wondering if there were funeral expenses I needed to help with. I had some savings left, though not much after helping Darren buy the beach house. "I know this is a difficult time," Mr. Chen said, pulling out a manila envelope. "But I need to discuss Darren's will with you." I nodded, assuming he wanted me to understand that everything would go to Fallon, which seemed natural. "These are for you," he said, holding out a set of keys. "To the beach house." I stared at them, confused. "I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake. Darren changed his will 2 weeks ago. The house goes to you, along with his personal savings account. Mrs. Crawford gets the main house here in town and the joint checking account, but the beach property is yours." My head was spinning. That's impossible. He barely spoke to me these past months. Mr. Chen's expression was kind, but professional. He came to my office on a Tuesday afternoon, said he needed to make some changes urgently. He seemed troubled about something. He specifically requested that I not mention the changes to his wife until after the reading. I took the keys with trembling hands. They felt cold and foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. "There's also this," Mr. Chen said, handing me a smaller envelope. "He asked me to give it to you personally after the service." The envelope had my name written in Darren's familiar handwriting. I clutched it against my chest, the first piece of my son I'd received in months. "When did you say he changed the will?" I asked. 2 weeks ago, Tuesday, April 23rd. My breath caught. That was the day after Matthew's 3rd birthday party. The party I hadn't been invited to, though I'd dropped off a gift at Darren's office. I'd wondered why he'd seemed so strange when I saw him that day, distracted and almost nervous. Across the room, I could see Fallon accepting condolences, playing the part of the grieving widow perfectly. She kept dabbing at her eyes with tissues, though I never actually saw tears. Maybe grief affected people differently. Maybe she was in shock. Mr. Chen followed my gaze. "Mrs. Crawford asked me about the will earlier. I explained that these matters take time to process, that we'd need to review everything carefully. She seemed to assume everything would be straightforward." I nodded, still trying to process what was happening. "Should I tell her about the beach house?" "That's entirely up to you. Legally, you're under no obligation to discuss your inheritance with anyone." After he left, I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the keys and the unopened envelope. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately, desperate for any final words from my son. But another part of me was terrified of what I might find inside. The beach house. The same place I'd been banned from just months ago was now mine. It felt surreal, like some cosmic joke. What was I supposed to do with it? I'd been planning to visit Darren there just last weekend, before remembering I wasn't welcome anymore. I started the drive home, but found myself taking the coastal highway instead. Almost without deciding, I was heading toward the beach house, drawn by a need I couldn't explain. The house looked exactly the same as I remembered. A weathered blue cottage with white trim, sitting on a small bluff overlooking the ocean. I'd fallen in love with it the moment Darren had shown it to me 5 years ago, when he and Fallon were newlyweds looking for their dream home. "Mom, it's perfect, but we're 20,000 short," he'd said, his voice heavy with disappointment. I'd written the check that same day, using most of my retirement savings. It felt worth it to see the joy on his face, the way he'd hugged me and promised I'd always have a room there. Now I was standing in the driveway with the keys to a house I'd never expected to own, holding a letter from my dead son. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. Fallon had clearly been packing things up. Boxes were scattered around the living room, and several of the photos that used to line the mantelpiece were gone. I walked to the window that overlooked the ocean, the same spot where I used to stand with Matthew on my hip, pointing out boats and seagulls. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the hardwood floors, and for a moment, I could almost hear the echoes of better times. Finally, I sat down in Darren's favorite armchair and opened the envelope with shaking hands. "Dear Mom," the letter began, and I could hear his voice as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. What I read next changed everything I thought I knew about my son's final months, and about the woman he'd married. The letter was 3 pages long, written in Darren's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I read each word, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and Mr. Chen has followed my instructions to give you the beach house. I know this must be confusing, especially after how I've treated you these past few months. I owe you an explanation, and I pray I'll have the chance to give it to you in person before you ever have to read this letter. Mom, I was wrong about everything. So terribly, horribly wrong. I discovered something about Fallon 3 weeks ago that has turned my whole world upside down. I found emails on her laptop. She'd left it open by accident after a few glasses of wine. At first, I thought I was seeing things, misunderstanding what I was reading. But there was so much evidence, Mom. So much proof that the woman I married, the woman I chose over you, has been lying to both of us for years. She never wanted me to cut contact with you. She orchestrated it. Every single argument we had about you was based on things she either made up entirely or twisted beyond recognition. That day you asked about Matthew's eating at Christmas, she told me you said he looked malnourished and that I was obviously not providing for my family. When you offered to help with dishes, she said you criticized her housekeeping and called her lazy in front of the neighbors. None of it was true, Mom. None of it. I found emails between her and her sister where she laughed about how easy it was to manage me by making me choose between my wife and my overbearing mother. She wrote about how she needed to eliminate the competition for my attention and money. She called you the old bat who thinks she knows everything, and said getting rid of you was phase 1 of taking full control. There's more, Mom, and it gets worse. She's been having an affair with her personal trainer, Marcus, for over a year. I found hotel receipts, text messages, even photos. All those times she said she was at her sister's house or at the gym late, she was with him. She told him she was planning to divorce me as soon as she could figure out how to get the most money out of it. But the thing that makes me sickest, the thing I can barely write down, is what she said about Matthew. In one email to Marcus, she complained that having a baby trapped her with me longer than she'd planned. She wrote that she never wanted to be a mother, that Matthew was just part of the investment in her future financial security. I've been walking around in a daze for weeks, trying to figure out what to do. The woman I thought I married doesn't exist. She's been playing a part this whole time, and I fell for it completely. Worse, I let her turn me against you, the one person who has loved me unconditionally my entire life. I'm changing my will to give you the beach house because it should have been yours anyway. You helped me buy it, and Fallon always resented that. She once told her sister that she hated how the house reminded me of my dependence on Mommy's money. I want you to have it, Mom, because it represents the love between us that she tried so hard to destroy. I'm planning to file for divorce next week. I've already moved money into a separate account that she doesn't know about, enough to make sure Matthew and I will be okay. I'm going to ask for full custody because I have evidence of her affairs and her complete disinterest in being a mother. But most importantly, I'm going to call you tomorrow and beg for your forgiveness. I'm going to tell you everything and ask if you can possibly forgive your stupid son who chose a manipulative liar over his own mother. I love you, Mom. I never stopped loving you, even when I was too blind and foolish to show it. You deserved better from me, and I plan to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Your loving son, Darren P.S. If something happens to me before I can make this right, please know that you were the best mother any man could ask for. Take care of Matthew. He's going to need his grandmother more than ever. I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. My son had discovered the truth. He'd realized that Fallon had systematically destroyed our relationship with lies and manipulation. He'd been planning to come back to me, but he'd died before he could make that phone call. I sat there in his chair, tears streaming down my face, feeling a mixture of devastating grief and overwhelming relief. Grief that we'd never had our reconciliation, that he'd died believing he might never earn my forgiveness. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the closeness we'd shared for 35 years. The late afternoon sun was fading, casting the living room in deep shadows, but I couldn't bring myself to turn on the lights. I felt like I was sitting in a sacred space, holding the last words my son would ever say to me. Then I heard footsteps on the front porch. I quickly folded the letter and slipped it into my purse just as the front door opened. Fallon walked in carrying several empty boxes, her face flushed from exertion. She stopped short when she saw me sitting in the dark. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp with surprise and anger. "The lawyer gave me the keys," I said quietly. "Darren left me the house." Her face went white. then red, then white again. The boxes slipped from her hands and crashed to the floor. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He changed his will 2 weeks ago." Fallon sank into the chair across from me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For several long moments, neither of us spoke. "There must be some mistake," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. I studied her face in the dim light. The perfect mask of grief she'd worn at the funeral was completely gone. What I saw now was raw panic. "He knew, didn't he?" I said softly. "Knew what?" But her eyes darted away from mine. "About Marcus. About your plans to divorce him. About what you did to turn him against me." The color drained from her face completely. "I don't know what you're talking about." "He wrote me a letter, Fallon. He told me everything." She shot up from the chair like it was on fire. "You're lying. Darren wouldn't do that. He loved me." "He did love you. That's what makes this so tragic. He loved a woman who never existed." Fallon started pacing, her hands shaking. "You can't prove anything. Whatever you think you know, you can't prove it." I didn't respond. I just watched her fall apart. This woman who had stolen 3 months of my relationship with my son. This woman who had made him doubt his own mother's love. "Look," she said, trying to pull herself together. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe there were some misunderstandings. But we're both grieving right now. We both loved Darren. Surely we can work something out." The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced. I could see exactly how she'd fooled my son for so long. "What kind of arrangement did you have in mind?" I asked. Hope flickered in her eyes. "Well, this house needs a lot of work. The roof leaks, the plumbing is old. It would be expensive for you to maintain on your fixed income. I could buy it from you for a fair price, maybe $75,000. That would give you a nice nest egg for your retirement. $75,000. For a house worth at least $300,000 that I'd helped purchase in the first place." "That's very generous," I said. She relaxed slightly. "I'm just trying to do what's best for everyone. Darren wouldn't want us fighting over material things." "You're right," I said. "Darren wouldn't want that." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean where the sunset was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. But Darren also wouldn't want his son being raised by a woman who thinks of him as nothing more than an investment in her financial security. The silence behind me was deafening. The next morning, I returned to the beach house with a clear purpose. I needed to understand the full extent of Fallon's deception, not for revenge, but for my own peace of mind. My son had discovered something so terrible it had made him change his will in secret. I owed it to his memory to uncover the complete truth. Fallon's car wasn't in the driveway, which gave me the freedom to explore without interruption. Using the key Darren had left me, I let myself in and headed straight for his home office. The room felt frozen in time. His coffee mug still sat on the desk, a ring of dried coffee staining the bottom. His reading glasses were folded neatly beside his computer keyboard. For a moment, the grief hit me so hard I couldn't breathe, but I forced myself to focus. Darren had mentioned finding emails on Fallon's laptop. Maybe there was more evidence here, more pieces of the puzzle I needed to understand. I turned on his computer, grateful that he'd never been one for complicated passwords. Like always, he'd used my birthday, October 15th, combined with the year he graduated college. His email inbox was mostly work-related messages and automated bills, but there was a folder labeled Personal Important that caught my attention. Inside, I found something that made my blood run cold. Screenshots. Dozens of them. Darren had systematically documented Fallon's betrayal. Email conversations between Fallon and her sister Brenda. Text messages with Marcus the trainer. Even photos that Marcus had sent her that were too explicit for me to look at directly. But it was the conversation with her sister that revealed the true depth of Fallon's manipulation. "Brenda, how's the husband management going?" Fallon, "Easier than I thought. Men are so predictable when you know which buttons to push." Brenda, "What did you do about his mother? She seemed like she could be a problem." Fallon, "Oh, The old bat? I took care of that months ago, just had to plant the right seeds. Tell him she criticized my parenting, make him think she disapproved of our marriage. He's so desperate to be a good husband that he chose me over her without even questioning it. Brenda. Brilliant. And he has no idea? Fallon. None. He actually thanked me for being understanding about his difficult mother. Meanwhile, I haven't had to deal with her hovering around, judging everything I do. The house feels like mine now. Brenda. What about when the kid gets older? Won't he wonder why Grandma never visits? Fallon. By then, hopefully, I'll be divorced and living with Marcus. The kid can have whatever relationship he wants with her. I won't be around to care. Brenda. You're terrible. I love it. Fallon. The best part is, Darren keeps talking about how mature and wise I am for recognizing that some family relationships are toxic. He has no idea I created the toxicity. I had to stop reading for a moment. The casual cruelty of it, the way she'd laughed about destroying a relationship that had meant everything to both Darren and me, made me physically sick. But there was more. Screenshots of conversations between Fallon and Marcus that revealed the full scope of her plans. Marcus. When are you going to leave him? Fallon. I need to be strategic. The prenup protects some of his assets. But if I can prove I'm the primary caregiver for Matthew, I can get more in child support. Plus, his mother helped him buy this beach house. If I play my cards right, I might be able to get that too. Marcus. How? Fallon. Simple. I make him choose between me and the house. Tell him I can't feel comfortable there knowing his mother's money paid for it. He'll sell it and give me half the proceeds to keep me happy. Men always choose the path of least resistance. Marcus. And if he doesn't? Fallon. Then I'll just wait until after the divorce. Community property laws are beautiful things. My hands were shaking as I continued reading. There were detailed discussions about which of Darren's assets she could claim, how to present herself as the wronged party in a divorce, and worst of all, conversations about Matthew that revealed her complete lack of maternal feeling. Marcus, what about the kid? You don't seem very attached. Fallon, I'm not. I never wanted children, but Darren was obsessed with having a family. I figured one kid was a reasonable price to pay for long-term financial security. Marcus, doesn't it bother you, pretending to love him? Fallon, it's not that hard. Smile at the right times, post cute photos on social media, show up to the important stuff. Most of parenting is just performance anyway. Marcus, what happens to him after we're together? Fallon, Darren can have him. I'll take my child support payments and live my actual life. The kid will probably be better off with his father anyway. At least Darren actually wanted him. I had to stop reading. The casual way she discussed abandoning her own child, the cold calculation behind every decision she'd made, was more than I could absorb all at once. But Darren had saved the worst for last. In a folder labeled Recent Urgent, I found evidence that Fallon hadn't just been planning to leave. She'd been actively sabotaging their marriage in more dangerous ways. Bank statements showing that she'd been gradually transferring money from their joint accounts into a personal account that Darren didn't know about. Not small amounts. Over the past year, she'd moved $43,000. Medical records showing that she'd been giving Darren sleep medication without his knowledge, dissolved in his evening coffee. The prescription was in her name, claiming she needed help with anxiety, but the emails to Marcus revealed the truth. He's been asking too many questions about where I go during the day. The sleeping pills in his coffee buy me at least 3 extra hours of freedom each night. He thinks he's just been tired from work stress. My heart stopped. She'd been drugging my son. The final piece of evidence was the most chilling. A conversation from just days before Darren's death. Marcus. He's getting suspicious. Maybe we should slow down. Fallon. No, I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of pretending. I want out of this marriage and I want it now. Marcus. What if he fights the divorce? Fallon. He won't be able to. I've been documenting everything. His emotional abuse, his controlling behavior, his unstable relationship with alcohol. By the time I'm done, everyone will see him as the problem. Marcus. And if that doesn't work? Fallon. Then I'll have to get more creative. Accidents happen, Marcus. especially to people who take sleeping pills and don't realize how they affect their balance on stairs. I stared at that last message for a long time, my blood turning to ice. The timestamp was from 3 days before Darren died. 3 days before he was found at the bottom of the stairs in his own home. The police had ruled it an accidental fall. A tragic accident involving a man who'd been taking sleep medication for anxiety and had simply missed a step in the dark. But now I knew the truth. Darren hadn't been taking sleep medication for anxiety. He'd been taking it because his wife had been drugging him without his knowledge. And that final conversation suggested that Fallon had been planning something even worse than divorce. I printed out every screenshot, every conversation, every piece of evidence. My hands were steady now, driven by a cold fury that burned deeper than grief. This wasn't just about the lies she'd told or the relationship she'd destroyed. This was about my son's death, and the growing suspicion that it hadn't been an accident at all. As I gathered the evidence, I found one more folder on Darren's computer. This one was labeled, "For Mom, in case something happens." Inside was a video file. With trembling fingers, I clicked play. Darren's face appeared on the screen, and I had to grip the desk to keep from falling. He looked exhausted, older than his 35 years, with dark circles under his eyes that I now knew were from the drugs his wife had been giving him. "Mom, if you're watching this, then something has happened to me, and I never got the chance to call you like I planned." His voice was thick with emotion, and I could see tears in his eyes. "I need you to know how sorry I am. I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Fallon made me believe things about you that weren't true, and I was too stupid and too desperate to be a good husband to question them." He wiped his eyes and continued, "I found out what she's been doing, Mom. All of it. And I'm scared. Not just of losing everything I thought I had, but actually scared for my safety. She's been drugging me, stealing money, and I think she's planning something worse." My heart was breaking all over again as I watched my son, realizing he'd known he was in danger. "I'm going to confront her tomorrow. I'm going to tell her I know everything and that I want a divorce. But if something happens to me, if this doesn't go the way I hope it will, I need you to know the truth. And I need you to protect Matthew. He's going to need his grandmother." The video ended with him looking directly into the camera, his expression filled with love and regret. "I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. Please forgive me." That was when I knew exactly what I had to do. I spent the rest of that day carefully organizing all the evidence I'd found. Every screenshot, every bank statement, every piece of Darren's investigation into the woman who had destroyed our family. I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 different locations. If Fallon thought she could continue her charade, she was gravely mistaken. But I didn't call the police. Not yet. First, I needed to confront her myself. I needed to look into the eyes of the woman who had stolen my son from me and possibly killed him, and let her know that her reign of manipulation was over. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The next evening, as I was sitting in the beach house going through more of Darren's belongings, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Through the window, I watched Fallon get out of her sedan, moving with quick, agitated steps. She had a key, of course, but she knocked on the door first. "Inez, I know you're in there. We need to talk." I opened the door slowly, taking in her appearance. Gone was the composed widow from the funeral. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, and there was a wild look in her eyes that I'd never seen before. "Come in," I said calmly. She pushed past me into the living room, then spun around to face me. "You can't just take this house. I know you think you have some legal right to it, but this is my home. Mine and Matthew's. Is it?" I asked, closing the door behind her. "Because from what I understand, you were planning to leave both the house and Matthew behind anyway." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I walked to the kitchen table where I'd laid out some of the printed screenshots. Not all of them. I wanted to see how much she'd admit to before I revealed the full extent of what I knew. "These," I said simply. Fallon rushed to the table, her hands shaking as she picked up the papers. I watched her face crumble as she read her own words. The casual cruelty she'd shown when discussing my son and grandson. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "Darren found them. He saved everything before he died." She sank into a chair, the papers falling from her hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked so small, so defeated. But then I remembered the video of my son, scared and alone, knowing his wife was drugging him. "It's not what it looks like," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "Really? Then please, explain what it actually is." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, the mask had slipped completely. The sweet, grieving widow was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "You want the truth?" she said, her voice hard. "Fine. Yes, I manipulated the situation between you and Darren. Yes, I was having an affair. Yes, I was planning to divorce him. But I never wanted him to die. No," I said quietly. "You just wanted him unconscious every night so you could sneak out to see your boyfriend. The fact that sleep medication and stairs don't mix well was just an unfortunate side effect." Her eyes widened. "You can't prove that, can't I?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken of her final conversation with Marcus. "Accidents happen, Marcus, especially to people who take sleeping pills and don't realize how they affect their balance on stairs." The color drained from her face completely. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it, Fallon?" She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "Look, I admit I made mistakes. I wasn't happy in my marriage, and I handled it badly. But Darren's death was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident that you were prepared for," I said. "That you practically predicted." "That's not fair. I was angry when I wrote that. People say things they don't mean when they're angry." I studied her face, looking for any trace of genuine remorse, any sign that she understood the magnitude of what she'd done. Instead, I saw only fear, not for Darren, not for Matthew, but for herself, and what might happen if the truth came out. "Where's my grandson?" I asked. "He's with my sister. He doesn't need to be around all this. Unpleasantness. Unpleasantness. Is that what you call destroying a family?" She spun around, her composure cracking further. "You act like you're so perfect, but where were you when Darren needed you?" "Oh, that's right. You were banned from his life because you couldn't keep your opinions to yourself." The old me would have flinched at those words, would have wondered if there was truth in them. But now I knew better. "I was banned because you lied about me, systematically and deliberately. You turned my son against me because I was an obstacle to your plans." "Your son was a grown man who made his own choices," she snapped. "If he chose to believe me over you, maybe that says something about your relationship. It says something about your skill as a manipulator. Nothing more." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're pathetic. Even now, even with him gone, you can't accept that he didn't need his mommy anymore." I felt a flash of rage, hot and pure, but I kept my voice level. He did need me. That's why he was coming back. That's why he changed his will. That's why he made that video apologizing and promising to make things right. "What video?" The question came out sharp, panicked. "The one where he says he's afraid of you, where he documents how you've been drugging him, where he explains that he's going to confront you about everything he's discovered." Fallon's face went white. She gripped the back of the chair so hard her knuckles went white. "There's no video. Would you like to see it?" The silence stretched between us for several long moments. I could almost see her mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I could prove, how much danger she was in. Finally, she straightened up and smoothed her hair, trying to reclaim some dignity. "Fine. Let's say, hypothetically, that some of what you think you know is true. What do you want?" "I want you to leave, tonight. Pack whatever belongs to you and go." "And Matthew?" "Matthew stays with me until I can arrange proper custody. Darren wanted me to protect him, and that's what I'm going to do. You can't keep a child from his mother. I can keep a child from a woman who thinks of him as nothing more than a financial investment, a woman who was planning to abandon him anyway." She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her weighing her options. Finally, she spoke, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. "Look, I know we've had our differences, but we both care about Matthew's well-being. Maybe we can work something out. I'll admit I made some mistakes in my marriage, but I never wanted Darren to get hurt. And I do love my son, whatever you might think." It was the same manipulation she'd used on Darren, the same fake reasonableness that had convinced him to choose her over me. But I was 66 years old, and I'd learned to recognize lies when I heard them. The only thing you love is yourself, Fallon. The only thing you care about is what you can get out of other people. Her mask slipped again, revealing the cold anger underneath. You self-righteous bitch. You think you're so much better than me, but you're nothing. A pathetic old woman living in the past, clinging to a son who outgrew you years ago. Perhaps. But I'm a pathetic old woman with evidence of adultery, theft, and quite possibly murder. I'm a pathetic old woman who's about to become guardian to a 3-year-old boy you never wanted anyway. You can't prove murder. Maybe not, but I can prove everything else. And once the police start looking into Darren's death with fresh eyes, knowing what they'll know about you, I wonder what they'll find. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, two women who had loved the same man in completely different ways. One who had cherished him, and one who had destroyed him. What happens if I leave? She asked finally. You disappear. You take whatever money you've already stolen and you start over somewhere else. You don't contact Matthew. You don't try to claim any more of Darren's assets. And you never come back. And if I don't? I picked up my phone and showed her the contact information for Detective Martinez, the officer who had called about Darren's death. Then I make some phone calls, and we see how well your story holds up under real scrutiny. The silence was deafening. Outside, the waves crashed against the shore in their eternal rhythm, indifferent to the human drama playing out in the little blue house. Finally, Fallon nodded. I need time to pack. You have until tomorrow morning. Then I want you gone. She walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. You think you've won something, but you haven't. You're still a lonely old woman with no family except a child who's going to grow up asking why his mother never visits. Maybe, I said. But he'll grow up knowing his father loved him enough to protect him, and knowing his grandmother loved them both enough to fight for the truth. After she left, I sat alone in the beach house as darkness fell over the ocean. Tomorrow, I would begin the legal process of gaining custody of Matthew. I would make sure Darren's real story was told, that his memory wasn't tainted by Fallon's lies. But tonight, I just sat in my son's favorite chair and mourned, not just for what I'd lost, but for what I'd found too late. 6 months have passed since that confrontation with Fallon, and I'm sitting on the deck of what I now think of as my home, watching my grandson Matthew build sandcastles on the beach below. He's 4 now, still small enough to need help reaching the high cupboards, but old enough to ask questions about why Mommy went away. I've told him the truth, in the gentle way you tell difficult truths to children. That sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people they love, and that his mommy needed to go live somewhere else to figure out how to be a better person. That his daddy loved him very much but got sick and couldn't stay with us, but that he's watching over both of us from heaven. Matthew seems to accept this explanation with the resilience that children have. He misses his father. Sometimes he wakes up crying for Daddy, but he's settled into our new life with surprising ease, perhaps because for the first time, he's living with someone who sees him as a precious gift, rather than an inconvenience. Fallon left that night just as she'd promised. I found the house keys on the kitchen counter the next morning, along with a note that said simply, "Tell Matthew his mother loves him." No apology, no acknowledgement of the damage she'd done. Just one final manipulation, trying to plant seeds of doubt about whether I'd tell her son the truth about why she'd gone. The legal process was surprisingly straightforward. Darren's will was ironclad, and the evidence of Fallon's adultery and financial theft made her custody claim weak at best. Her lawyer advised her not to fight it, especially when my attorney made it clear that we had documentation of her affairs and her plans to abandon Matthew anyway. She sent one letter about 3 months after she left, postmarked from Arizona. It was addressed to me, not Matthew, and contained no return address. "I know what you think of me," she wrote, "but I want you to know that I did love Darren, in my own way. Maybe not the way you think love should be, but it was real to me. I hope Matthew grows up happy. I hope he doesn't hate me when he's old enough to understand." I never replied. There was nothing left to say to her, and I wasn't about to give her any information about where we were or how Matthew was doing. She'd made her choice when she chose Marcus and money over her family. Now she had to live with the consequences. The police never reopened the investigation into Darren's death. When I brought them the evidence I'd found, Detective Martinez listened politely, but explained that without concrete proof of foul play, they couldn't justify the expense of reopening a case that had already been ruled accidental. The sleeping pills in Darren's system were consistent with the prescription bottle found in the house, the one in Fallon's name that she claimed she'd been sharing with him for his anxiety. But I know the truth. I may never be able to prove it in court, but I know that my son died because his wife was drugging him and didn't care about the consequences. In my heart, that's enough. Justice doesn't always come from the legal system. I've transformed the beach house into a real home for Matthew and me. The master bedroom is now his playroom, filled with toys and books and the kind of creative chaos that comes with a curious 4-year-old. I sleep in what used to be the guest room, and I've never slept better in my life. We have routines now. Matthew helps me make breakfast every morning, standing on a little stool to reach the counter, proudly scrambling eggs that are usually more shell than egg. We walk on the beach every afternoon, collecting shells and watching the boats. In the evenings, after dinner and bath time, we sit in Darren's old chair together while I read him stories. His favorite book is about a little boy who goes on adventures with his grandmother. "That's us, Grandmama," he says every time we read it, snuggling closer against my side. "We're adventurers." Yes, we are. I've made peace with the fact that I lost 3 months with my son because of Fallon's lies, but I refuse to lose any more time to anger or regret. Darren knew the truth in the end. He was coming back to me. That has to be enough. Sometimes when Matthew is napping or playing quietly, I take out the letter Darren wrote me and read it again. Not because I need to remember his words. I have them memorized. But because holding that paper makes me feel connected to him in those final weeks when he was fighting to find his way back to me. I also watched the video he made, the one where he apologized and promised to make things right. It breaks my heart every time, seeing how exhausted and scared he was, but it also fills me with pride. My son was brave enough to admit he was wrong. He was strong enough to fight back against the woman who was destroying him. He may not have lived to complete that fight, but he started it, and I finished it for him. Matthew asks about his father often, and I tell him stories. Real stories, not the sanitized version Fallon would have preferred. I tell him about how Darren used to collect bottle caps when he was little, convinced they would be valuable someday. About how he cried the first time he had to get stitches but was brave enough to watch the doctor sew him up. About how he called me every Sunday until just a few months before he died, and how those calls were the highlight of my week. "Daddy loved you very much," I tell Matthew. "He wanted you to know that family is the most important thing in the world. Not money, not fancy houses, not what other people think of you. Just the people who love you no matter what." "Like you love me, Grandmama?" Exactly like that. I've started a college fund for Matthew with some of the money I've saved by not having to pay rent on an apartment anymore. It's not much yet, but it will grow. I want him to have choices that his father and I never had. I want him to be able to pursue his dreams without worrying about money. But more than that, I want him to grow up knowing he's loved unconditionally. I want him to never doubt that he has value beyond what he can provide for other people. I want him to be able to trust his instincts about people, to recognize manipulation when he sees it, to never let anyone convince him that the people who love him are the enemy. The beach house has become a gathering place for the few real friends I have left. Mrs. Patterson from my old neighborhood brings her grandchildren for play dates with Matthew. My old colleague from the hospital, Janet, visits every few weeks and always brings homemade cookies. Even Mr. Chen, Darren's lawyer, stops by occasionally to check on us and watch Matthew show off his latest sandcastle creation. These people, who barely knew me before, have become my chosen family. They see Matthew and me together and understand immediately that we belong to each other. They don't ask uncomfortable questions about where Fallon went or whether I miss my old life. They just accept us as we are, a grandmother and grandson who found each other when we needed it most. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Darren had lived, if he'd gotten the chance to call me and apologize, if we'd had time to rebuild our relationship properly. Would Fallon have fought harder for custody? Would she have found new ways to manipulate the situation? But I try not to dwell on those what-ifs. The truth is, as painful as it was to lose my son, gaining custody of Matthew might not have been possible if Darren were still alive. The courts favor biological parents, even manipulative ones. In a twisted way, Darren's death freed Matthew from a mother who never wanted him and gave him to a grandmother who sees him as the most precious gift imaginable. Today is Sunday, and we're having what Matthew calls pancake breakfast on the deck overlooking the ocean. He's telling me about a dream he had where his daddy came to visit, and they built the biggest sandcastle in the world together. Was I in the dream? I ask, flipping another pancake. Of course, Grandmama. You made us lunch and took pictures. Daddy said to tell you he's proud of you for taking such good care of me. My throat tightens, but I smile. That sounds like something he would say. Do you think he can see us now? Matthew asks, syrup dripping down his chin. I look out at the endless blue ocean, at the seabirds diving for fish, at the sun painting everything in golden light. This house, this life, this second chance at motherhood that came from such tragic circumstances. I think he can, I tell Matthew, and I think he's very happy that we found each other. Matthew nods seriously, then grins and reaches for another pancake. Can we build a sandcastle after breakfast? A really big one? The biggest one ever, I promise. As we sit there together planning our day, I realize that I'm not the same woman who stood in that hospital room 6 months ago, devastated by my daughter-in-law's rejection. That woman was broken, defeated, convinced she'd somehow failed as a mother. This woman, the one sitting here with syrup-sticky fingers and sand in her shoes, knows better. This woman knows that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it means letting go. Sometimes it means fighting back. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it means getting a second chance to get it right. I failed to protect Darren from Fallon's manipulation, but I won't fail to protect Matthew from the same fate. He will grow up knowing he's cherished, knowing the difference between real love and conditional approval, knowing that his worth isn't determined by what he can do for other people. The beach house has become our sanctuary, but more than that, it's become our symbol. This is what real family looks like. Not perfect, not without grief and loss, but genuine, built on truth instead of lies, on love instead of manipulation. As Matthew runs down to the beach with his bucket and shovel, calling for me to hurry up and help with the castle, I feel something I haven't felt in years, complete peace. Not because my life is perfect, but because it's finally, authentically mine. Darren's legacy isn't the money or the property he left behind. His legacy is the truth he uncovered, and the grandson he trusted me to raise. His legacy is the love between us that survived even Fallon's best efforts to destroy it. And that legacy will live on in Matthew, in the stories I tell him about his father, in the values I teach him, in the unconditional love I give him every single day. We are both free now, free from lies, free from manipulation, free to love each other without fear or guilt or conditions. That's worth more than any inheritance could ever be. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.